Thank you guys, and welcome everyone on the internet. My name is Frank Mong. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Helium, and this is the Uplink, episode number 2. I'm honored and blessed to be here today with two of my friends, Ulysses and Will. Why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Ulysses Vinson, and I'm the Chief Smart Communities Officer of San Mateo County. And we just launched a regional innovation district called SMC Labs.
I'm Will Barkis. I lead the Smart Cities focus out of an innovation lab for the French telco Orange, which we can talk more about. I also work with the City of San Francisco as a volunteer technology advisor to the Mayor's Office of Civic Innovation, so get some insight into San Francisco's Smart Cities efforts.
Fantastic, guys. Well, you guys are here watching Uplink with Helium, so I assume you guys understand what Helium's trying to do. We're building an IoT network, a network for machines, and we were leveraging blockchain as a key component of that. Moving forward. So one of the things we want to talk about today is that we're here in San Francisco in this beautiful space with Orange Silicon Valley. Thank you, Will, for letting us use this space. We wanted to chat about smart cities and not just sort of where we are now and where we should be, but maybe let's start with sort of where we've come from. Because I think smart city and the idea of smart city, leveraging IoT, leveraging other kinds of technology, it's not new. It's been around for what, 7 years, 8 years, right? So maybe why don't we go back a little bit and talk about what Ulysses, how did you get into this and what's changed? Sort of what wasn't working before and what do you think is going to change for SMC Labs?
Yeah, so I think, it kind of started for us, a connected city or a connected region is a smart city or a smart region. And so what we did was the first initiatives kind of coming out of that concept was connecting people first. So one of the things that San Francisco did very well, as well as San Mateo County, was do public Wi-Fi, right? And that's something that people can understand because you needed to connect people, right? Make sure that people had access to the internet. So now taking on, using that as a platform, because they have been very successful in both regions, these efforts to connect people, but using that same thing to how do we connect things now and see how do we make government smarter, more efficient, more transparent. And so, there's been a lot of things in the, at your home, there are a lot of things that are connected. But, for government services, a lot of things that we can do that can make government services more efficient and also engaging our citizenry as well at the same time. So we understand that, San Mateo is very diverse. It's 765,000 people, 455 square miles, bordering San Francisco in the north and Palo Alto to the south. So it's very diverse. You have the coast side and you have the bay side, and you have various levels of, we have 23 cities within that county as well as a large unincorporated area. And so one of the challenges for us in providing services is making sure the areas are connected. So, and we have some, we're in Silicon Valley, but there's still pockets of, places where you just cannot connect and where it's very difficult to provide government services. So we're looking at seeing what are those opportunities, particularly in the coastal area where you have large agricultural districts and you have people who are living in the valleys, and so how do we provide those services there? And so we're looking at IoT, the Internet of Things, to maybe be that conduit to provide new and innovative services for the county.
Well, what do you have something like an example you can give of something that worked, whether it be in your past career in San Francisco or another location of something that worked, a smart city project that actually showed well or actually demoed well or produced something?
Yeah. So we just launched SMC Labs, and it's a regional innovation project. And the reason why we're calling it a regional because we think that technology should traverse through the borders of each individual city. Right. And we're a county of small to medium-sized cities, right? So we'll never be a San Francisco, and we'll never be a San Jose or an Oakland in the East Bay. So one of the things that we looked at, what are some of the regional problems, right? And so one of the regional problems that people are concerned about is air quality. So one of the first things that we did under the new SMC Labs is that we created a sandbox to say, hey, let's take air quality, which is a pretty mature, if you can say it, that's a relative term in IoT, mature, but it's one of the relatively mature IoT use cases. Because of the fires last year in Sonoma and the recent ones a couple of weeks ago, people are very concerned about air quality. So one of the first things we did, we partnered with Helium. We're using one of your sensors to detect air quality within the region. And we're also using another company, Fiber, to do just the same. And the reason is because of the microclimates, right? And the reason is because of, people, if parents want to be able to send their kids to school, and just say if they have asthma, for an example, they want to be able to know, is it safe to have their kids go in school, which last year, of course, because of the fires was a problem. So that's kind of one of the successful things. But again, for us, in our lab environment, how do we provide those services on a regional basis? It's okay, we have one innovation district in Redwood City and one in East Palo Alto, but we want to scan the whole region, and connectivity is a major part of it.
Sure. Well, just for the folks on the internet, if you're listening from different parts of the world, San Mateo County is actually a big space that's between San Francisco, which is a peninsula. San Jose is down below Silicon Valley. And in the middle is this massive amount of land with mountains that has both the bay and Pacific Ocean.
Correct.
And you do experience a lot of different temperatures, a lot of different things, microclimates that happen in your environment. So it's kind of unique in the county that you're in. So some of these environmental sensors or air quality sensors become an issue for you.
Absolutely.
It's good to know. Will, what about you and your background and time that you spent in the world of smart cities?
Yeah.
Can you talk about some things you've seen, maybe not in the Bay Area, maybe somewhere else in the world, where you've seen that either Orange is tackled or you've personally tackled that you can share with us?
Yeah. And so for the viewers, so Orange is not a household name in the U.S., but we're a French-based global telco. So we have roughly 270 million customers across 29 countries through Europe and Middle East and Africa, and so we want to be the IoT leader in many of our markets, and that's one big push for us. And we've deployed LoRa networks, which is low power wide area network technology, similar to Helium, or feature-wise, it has some features in common, across all the major populated areas in France, and we're selectively sort of applying in other areas, other markets. I wanted to step back and say, I always like starting a conversation around smart cities with the kind of broadest framing of the fact that the world population living in cities is going to double by 2050, according to the UN. Which is approximately 2.5 billion more human beings living on Earth in cities, with needs for city services and access to opportunity. So this is a very big challenge, and I think, how do we live in that world? How do we want to live, especially in the face of climate change? But just generally speaking, our systems are not necessarily set up to handle that kind of, volume of people. And so I think these layers of connectivity to enable us to understand the physical world with sensors and eventually actuators that do things as well. But just to capture the data, make some sense of it, and do something is going to be the only way we can get efficient enough to do that for that number of people. So back to your question about specific examples of things. Honestly, I have to say it's kind of early days. We have we widely deployed this network in France over the last year and a half or so. We're seeing applications in parking. So I like to also say every smart cities has now become a universal term defined kind of locally by every community. It's based on your local community needs, political priorities, community priorities, etc. So one challenge though pretty much everywhere is parking and traffic, and they're related. So we've seen a lot of efforts, but both in France, but also here actually in San Francisco. This is one of the success stories here, I'd say, is parking sensors to know, when are spots full, and help people either adjust the pricing, say, on the street to keep 20% of the spaces open was the goal in San Francisco, dynamic pricing on a weekly basis, or, ideally, at the other end of the spectrum, have the kind of Uber for your parking spot. Most of the time you're going someplace, you're not actually trying to get to that place. You're trying to get to where you can park whatever your mode of transportation is, mostly often cars. That's where you're actually trying to get. So we've deployed sensors in the actual parking spot that then report back over these networks, so how much parking availability there is. It's still a ways to go to get to that Uber of parking experience, but we're going that way.
Sure. It's interesting. 11 years ago, I was at a company called Silver Spring Networks, and they're in the business of smart metering and helping modernize utilities, both from power generation to power distribution, all the way to the demand side management, which is in the homes and office buildings, and how much power you're using. So energy efficiency was a big play there. When I was there 11 years ago, the idea that, hey, we can start to think about creating these meters that are smart, that can read how much electricity you're using, gas, water, and that signal can be sent back to the utility. So they can use less or generate less if you don't need it, or generate more if you do need it. That was sort of the beginnings in my mind of being smart about how you how you actually transmit resources and so forth. And even then, I think some of the words like smart cities started to pop up, and especially you mentioned France and Paris. There was massive initiatives around smart lighting and getting street lights to be turned on and off for the safety of the population there. So I think even back then, it was something that cities want to do, and I think consumers were interested as well. And the challenge even back then was comms, communications. And I wonder why. That was 11 years ago. From 11 years ago to today, we're seeing, maybe there's some parking capabilities and smart parking, and SMC Labs is trying to explore this again. What's causing the slowness of this development? Why is it taking 11 years?
Well, I find it interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. When Silver Springs worked with, say, PG&E, that really was, and it still is, probably the broadest application of a IoT network, right? Smart meters, because for me, it's a big envy, because it's like, wow, they're covering my obviously they must be covering my entire county.
Right.
But I think a lot of it for us is just education. I don't think people understand the technology just as of yet. I think it's still new. And I know for a city and a county, we just don't want to put up equipment just to put up equipment, right? And it's not something that the people necessarily like. So even if you put in, anything you put on a light pole, which is, the city and counties own the infrastructure pieces, right? But they're not, aesthetically pleasing to most people. So as we look, and it's also running in the background too, right? So if you look at smart trash cans, for an example, people, they don't know. That's kind of easy because there's probably a sensor in the trash can. They don't see it. They're happy that trash can is not overflowing with garbage. So that's kind of one of those applications that work. And we tried to look at use cases that people can understand, and smart garbage cans was one of them, as well as the smart parking. But I think because mobility is such an issue in the Bay Area, people are like, they want anything that can help them find a parking space. That last mile issue. But I think a lot of it for us, when we go and meet with our cities, it's still new. I think the concept is new from the government side of IoT.
Yeah, I think I was thinking this at the IoT World conference just a couple months ago, that we're really having the same conversations that we've been having for years in IoT, and the problem in many ways is there's just not connectivity yet. And I think it's also a little bit challenging, because I think you see, connectivity is not all one magical thing. And our goal is to have kind of ambient connectivity for whatever use case you want. You have the appropriate kind of connectivity, because there are different needs. Different power needs, different costs, different bandwidth, different range, all these things. And it really is early days for IoT and wireless. I think that's probably the answer, because cellular has been around for quite a while. There are obviously new generations, and 5G is going to be amazing for a lot of things. 4G is frankly amazing. In many ways, that is probably the fundamental enabler of the smart city that we're not really talking about that much, or 3G even, right? Because you didn't see these kind of applications like Uber before you had that level of connectivity. So I think it's a connectivity challenge, and it's not easy to deploy connectivity.
Very, very
don't need to tell you about it.
That's why, for us in our lab, we're testing different connectivity options. So we have, we're doing LoRaWAN, we're looking at, working with T-Mobile with NB-IoT, we're working with Helium to do kind of like that decentralized machine network, wireless, secured, blockchain. And we're also looking at, what, Sigfox is in there. But you're right, it's kind of like that, Betamax VHS, right?
It's the Wild West.
It's the Wild West, so we don't know what ultimately is going to be the standard.
And we've tested all of the different technologies out there in our company's exploration, right? Been around for 5 years. We have these closets full of equipment from every company. And our hope in the beginning was that one of these things would work. And I think what it comes down to for us when we explore, what's stopping the development of smart cities and I would say the accelerated adoption, I think it comes down to two things, really. One, when it comes to the tech itself, which may be less interesting to some folks, it's the battery power. So when you think about little machines or sensors, air quality sensors, you want to put that thing ideally somewhere that gives you some early warning, early detection. Wherever that is, probably doesn't have a plug, whether it's 120 or 240. There's no power source
Right.
for it to plug into to stay alive, right? I think to keep working. And so battery efficiency, battery power becomes a huge consideration. And that's not trivial. I don't think people realize it's actually really hard to figure out. And I don't think it matters what connectivity you're choosing, or whether it's NB-IoT or 4G or 5G. It's hard. And so what Helium's decided is like, hey, it's got to be sub-gigahertz. It's got to be 900 megahertz range, which is a free spectrum here in the US. And we have to use that. And that's got characteristics that allows us to design for very low power. And that, when I say very low power, I mean battery life's beyond 3 years. That's one. I think that's a big problem. And I think maybe the other problem, which I think has a chance of evolving quickly if a telco is willing to take the step, is really the economics, right? The data plan concept. When data plans work for me and you and our kids and our families, but when it's a little machine that needs 300 bytes every week, how do you charge a data plan for that? There's got to be a different way, a different economic model. Right? So I think those are probably the two things that are...
Yeah, and it's an unknown, right?
It's an unknown.
And you can't approach something or roll something out in government not knowing what the cost is going to be.
There's no structure around it.
Yeah. And until then, but in a pilot environment, we're just testing it. So there is no necessarily, there's no cost associated with that today.
Right.
But if I'm being asked to put a budget together, they say, well, okay, put a budget together.
Right.
I really can't because I don't know what those costs would be. Right.
Yeah, it's a little bit of the classic chicken and egg problem with technology development. It's like, why would you deploy all this infrastructure when there's nothing to use it for?
Yeah.
But you wouldn't build use cases.
That's right.
Unless you had the infrastructure.
And I think that's a common problem, not just a challenge that Orange has to address in that business model. I think it's all large telcos or large service providers where there's a sunk cost of infrastructure, right? I think this is where perhaps blockchain could be an interesting play here to try to force a change in that space, right? Because if we have a blockchain which Helium has built, and we can incentivize a community to build infrastructure and not depend on not just Orange, but another large telco in the U.S. I won't name other names here. But if T-Mobile or something, right? If they didn't have to do it, and it was the community that built it, and the incentive was built into the blockchain, where they're incented to do so, provide coverage and share that coverage. That's an interesting play. I don't know if it'll work, but it's an interesting experiment socially, but as well as economically and business model wise.
And I think part of why it's possible, it gets back to the technology and the features of the technology.
Right.
If this were 5G and you had to be doing microcells, that'd be very difficult because the number of people you'd have to get to buy in to this idea would be difficult. But we're talking about very long range.
That's right.
And you didn't, I guess in that
miles,
miles, better than cellular.
That's right.
So I think those combination of, as you put it, low power, 1/100th to 1,000th of battery power, that's amazing. Plus low cost, plus long range.
Right.
And suddenly it's a nonlinear thing where you have a device that's dead simple to use. You never have to deal with it ever again.
Right.
You don't have to deal with changing Wi-Fi passwords or it just works, and it costs pennies on the dollar of previous data plans. And you have totally new things you would do that you just wouldn't do with a cellular, a device you had to put a SIM card in that sucked down battery life,
Certainly.
Certainly.
One of the things that we've seen from a smart environment, maybe not a smart city, but certainly a smart application that's been, for us, pretty popular, is in agriculture, actually. And so in South Carolina, we have these farms and a group that's driving an exchange of farm equipment, farm materials, and they're exchanging farm output. So trading grains with corn and so forth. This company called Ulysses, and they've taken our technology and they've applied it to their greenhouse farming, where they're trying to do year-round strawberry farming or year-round vegetable farming for that region, and they've applied it to water irrigation to really control and optimize how much water is used and ensure that the entire environment is ideal so that seasonality is eliminated. And that's a really interesting application, which you couldn't do without smart sensors, without the ability to have low-cost communications. And that seemed to be really attractive to that particular industry. Is there something like that you guys have seen beyond parking for the county of San Mateo that can help everyone, not just sort of the haves, but the have-nots as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Our vision and goal is to make sure that any innovation we do in one place, we have to be able to do it in another. So as as it relates to rolling it out, actually making it an actual project. But yeah, and agriculture is one of the ones that that impresses me as far as a use case.
Yeah.
The farming,
Yeah.
I mean, the IoT use cases they have in agriculture is, it's pretty dynamic and pretty impressive when you look at the outcomes. So the county itself is not into farming, right? But we obviously have farming activity in the county. So it's something that we're definitely interested in possibly partnering with the folks that are in that business. But also we have 23 parks that are scattered around the county, and so irrigation and soil moisture and all of that is very, very important, as well as flooding. Because one of the things, we have parts of the county down like in the Pescadero area where, when that major rainstorm happened, some roads were washed out. So I think all of that could apply, and maybe we can find, because I think, we have to find, and that's what we're looking for as strategic partners, to say, hey, look, we have this problem, and let's see how we can fix it using one of these kind of IoT products and services.
So two really tangible use cases jump into my mind. One is a kind of a test we're doing, but at least it's only one initial site with a gas station like the bathrooms and the entryway into the gas station, and like understanding where people in cars and things are within that space. Knowing, for instance, when the toilet paper has run out. Being able to report back your satisfaction with the bathroom experience or other things, and like just knowing how many cars came in is useful. So we're sort of censoring up and experimenting with how that enables the operator of the gas station to improve their services, and they obviously improve the experience for people coming in. Another one is actually here in the city, also on the same topic area, but using sensors in trash cans. And this came up earlier, but San Francisco has roughly 3,200 public bins, like the ones on the sidewalk where you put your trash in. And public cleanliness is a big problem here. There's trash, all over the city a lot of times. And the former mayor and I think the current mayor has spoken to this is a priority for the city, like clean streets. And so there was a test of 50 sensors, and the sensors had not just what you would expect to know, how full the bin is, but it also knew where the bin was. Like a GPS receiver was in there. They didn't actually really know. I mean, they knew, but sometimes these things grow legs. They have to send a person out to survey them manually on paper. And so now they can automatically get the location, but also there's an accelerometer, so if it tips over, they know that as well. But most importantly, like I said, they know how full it is. And so, this is another nonlinear thing. Like if the trash can is getting full, once it hits 100%, you now have a problem as it starts, well, really 120%, 130%, then it starts to spill over into the public space. And it's kind of extra tricky here. Like most cities, there's always nuance. There's a private company that does the pickup of the bins. So Recology services all the bins. However, they don't service anything that's spilled onto the street. The Department of Public Works has to go out and deal with that. And so if they can prevent or know, how fast it's filling up, how full it's gotten, for all these bins, they can prevent the overflow, which then creates more, it just like then creates a big problem. And so
it's a big issue. I mean, you look at parks in San Francisco. We all love our parks in San Francisco, and what happens? It's unpredictable weather, and then if you have a nice day, chances are the garbage is going to overflow, right? I mean, there's some indicators there, but the interesting thing, in which I find a challenge with all of this, and you mentioned DPW and the garbage collection, is that we as IT and technology professionals are kind of entering this business of a different agency, which in this case is Public Works, right? Their job is to do the trash. They are the ones that take care of the facilities of a government building. And so now we're saying, hey, IT is saying, hey, we want to make it smarter. Are you okay with this? Or if you do smart, managed trash management, waste management, we have to have their buy-in in order for it to be a success.
Totally. Well, and I think this is a good illustration too of moving so there's another agency there, like the SF Environment. There's a goal of Vision Zero, getting to all of our no trash to landfill. And so this is a step towards understanding, what is going on in our waste system, in the bins, like what are people putting in there? You could in theory, like change the sensors out and dial up and understand every item of trash that goes in, start classifying it, understand how are people behaving around the trash. But to step back too, this is a great, the IoT revolution that I think Helium and others are enabling, is that we don't know anything about the state of the trash. All we know is when people call 311. That's the current state of knowledge of the situation. We're moving to now understand how full are the bins, and then eventually we'll say, well, what are people putting in the bins and when and why? and I think
Yeah.
that will really help us be smart.
Yeah.
For sure. One of the questions we had about, I would say 3 months ago, was what kind of applications are useful for everyday folks, right? And what could be done better? And so we didn't know the answer to that. Helium doesn't know everything, right? Unfortunately. So we actually ran a contest. We ran a contest on Hackster in conjunction with SparkFun and Google Cloud. And what we did was we got 25 submissions. We just closed the contest, I think, yesterday or the day before. And what was interesting that came out of that was people from around the world participated. And I think one of the two of the really interesting projects that I recall right now at this moment is one around air quality that you talked about, and how someone can build their own air quality sensor fairly quickly, very simply, and fairly cheaply. But another one that came out that I thought was super clever was around water quality. And because I guess we sort of take it for granted that our water is safe here in the United States and certainly in San Francisco, though not always safe in Flint, Michigan, it certainly wasn't. But you can't always assume. And if you get into a situation where it's not up to the county of San Mateo to ensure that the water is safe. There's only so much you can do, and each individual, perhaps in our homes, instead of just filtering water, we should check that the water is safe to drink. You need some kind of capability. So this guy, his name is Peter Ma. He lives in China. He created a sensor that can detect the elements within the water and report it back to anyone, to you or to a company, whoever it may be. Super interesting, super clever. And I thought those are some of the things that we kind of take for granted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, that reminds me of another success story in San Francisco. I mean, at the pilot level, using Sigfox as the actual connectivity provider, they put 2 sensors deep into the middle of the street in the wastewater pipes that take outflow from homes, and to measure like temperature, flow, and salinity, the amount of salt in it. And that was actually the most important thing, because if there's like a backup of salinity into the system, it kills a lot of the microorganisms that help treat the water. And so they can they can take different measures to prevent that from getting into the wastewater treatment.
Right.
And the access to this, these pipes is really difficult. It's really expensive.
Yeah.
They were doing it before and having changed it with cellular and having changed the battery every 3 months or 4 months.
Right.
Now, in theory, they can do it once, maybe for years and years,
Right.
and improve the treatment of our water and the cost.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I feel like some of these things that we don't see every day, like we take it for granted, right? You drink water, it's clean, right? But not everywhere in the world is water clean and safe to drink.
Yeah.
And so having the ability and the technology to make sure that can be safe is really important.
Yeah.
I think it's important that you said Mr. Ma, who created this. I mean, to me, that's kind of where you're going to find that innovation too, from the outside.
Right.
And I think that for us, we're looking to do something similar, where we're going to ask to really get the public involved, because government does certain things very, very well, right? And then other things, I think the innovation happens outside of government agencies. And so I think, as we look to see what that next greatest use case is going to be, I think you will find that in the community.
Yeah, and this Frank pointed this out earlier, but I think we don't often know what the innovation is going to look like, or what the use case is going to be created. And I think we've seen that a lot with just other kinds of connectivity. I mean, I don't think anyone would have predicted Airbnb or Uber or some of these other services that 15 years ago people probably wouldn't have believed that was possible or predicted. But so we're all often trying to partner with local innovation ecosystems where we go, because we don't know what the right answer is.
And to me, it's just like when we had 10 years ago, it was open government, open data. And so all of the innovation that was happening in that field came from third parties that said, hey, I'm taking this data and creating something really cool. And we're taking city data, county data, and we're doing routecy, and we're doing bus times, and we're doing, that innovation didn't happen inside the walls of government, it happened outside.
Yeah. You bring up something interesting, which is really government. What's government's role, do you think, in really sparking innovation? Because I think, even if I think back 11 years ago, when it was dealing with infrastructure, power distribution, and so forth, it was a lot of work to convince government to get behind it, and that then required the people to get behind it, right? And to me, that's a long process. Whereas you see our homes, and I think again we're in a little microclimate ourselves in Silicon Valley. all of our homes are wired up. We've got everything from Nest thermostats to like Ring doorbells, right? That's not normal. I don't think that's normal for most people around the world.
Right.
But then you see that innovation just happening, and cycles are like crazy fast. Smart TVs to the next bigger smart TV, et cetera, right? Every Black Friday is something new, and people just seem to consume it like crazy. But in government, it's different. There's different considerations. You can't just go buy the next widget. It doesn't
That's
work
right.
that way.
That's right.
So what what do you think is that? I guess call it a struggle, or call it checks and balance. Like, when do you jump in to adopt the technology versus ensuring that it's acceptable for all?
And that's a really big challenge, right? So as we have we have this lab environment, and there is a very traditional, archaic, if I would, procurement process that every government agency must follow. There's RFP, request for proposals, request for qualifications, request for information. And it's a long process. So when you're trying to be agile and you're trying to try out new things, that can be a challenge for government agencies. But what we're doing, and we're operating under the premise of we're testing and we're piloting, it's a little different in that we want to be able to at least be a part of this on the front end of technology as opposed to being reactionary to it. So that's why partnerships are very important, just starting out, getting people to understand what it means. So if we have Helium as a partner, if we partner with Orange, we go in there and say, we're testing this and let's see what can come out of it. And then we can officiate it by a formal process. But I think you're right. I think just the procurement process can be a challenge. But I think the role of especially for the county, is to be a resource, not only for the other cities, and not only for our agencies, but for the people. Because it's funny, when we launched SMC Labs, we got a lot of feedback from everyday people who said, this sounds cool. The county's doing this. And I'm like, yeah. And we would reach out to them and say, what kind of issues that are facing you? So I think that's kind of, for me, the government's role. And that the one thing that the government does, they do have the rights of way. They own the rights of way, right? So we do have the poles, minus the utilities have own some as well, but poles and street lights and traffic signals. We have power at our curbs and our sidewalks, so we can play. We kind of innately have our own sandbox to play in as well.
I would add, and I've heard you say this before, but that government can be a really powerful tool for everybody, right? Because you're representing everybody and trying to serve everybody. So making sure that this is inclusive and broad and fair is a really important role for the government. At the same time, I think it's a little bit unfair to criticize the sort of pace of innovation. I'm not saying you're criticizing, but just in general within government, in that it's not the same as a lot of services. Like Uber doesn't pick me up in the morning, or my Lyft doesn't arrive, I can choose a different company. But if the street breaks, there's only one. It's a monopoly, and they're serving everybody, and they're constrained by every dollar needing to be spent wisely. So I think there's a lot of challenges around government innovating, partly because if you actually look at the innovation process, most innovation actually is worse than the status quo, right? Like most things in the world that you could change end up being worse. So the space of new tools that are actually better than current tools is a fairly small one. And so I think it's challenging for the government to innovate in that sense. But,
yeah, for sure. I want to just take a second, pause, let folks know, please ask questions. The lines should be open. You can type them in. I've got someone in the other room. Our producers are out back there fielding questions, and they're actually texting it to me. So I've got some questions already. But if you want us to talk about something, you have a question for one of us on the panel, please feel free to ask, okay? I want to pick up quickly, and there was a question on this, based on sort of the concept of fairness and inclusivity. Those are kind of like, I would say, part of the themes around blockchain and why blockchain has existed, is the concept of decentralization and bringing sort of decision and power and trust to individuals, not to centralized entities. What are your thoughts, whether it's, you can say your personal thoughts or your company's thoughts or the government you represent, what are your thoughts around blockchain and how it can be applied to IoT?
Well, I think the blockchain it's very interesting and a very exciting concept in that it may be able to deliver some scale. When you have a decentralized network that I can and can be used as a connectivity tool, for transmission of whatever devices I have in the field, and it's done by individuals,
Right.
and it's done by a community center, or it's done by a church. I mean, who knows? And in having that incentive to actually say, hey, if you mount this, it broadens my network. It increases my ability to provide innovation to people in that area, right? We don't have the network like a PG&E with their smart meters, but that may help us get to that point where if there's areas that we cannot connect to, with that blockchain and using like the cryptocurrency as like an incentive, I think it's great. And so that, I think for me, it's just it's just another option for us to ensure that we're providing the same innovation throughout the entire county.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, I guess I'll share personal thoughts per
Sure.
se. It's a caveat. This is not Orange statement, but I mean, I think what we'll see with blockchain-enabled technologies, it will be a little bit like we've seen with the web and like decentralizing information. I mean, it's going to be a huge tool that's a little bit hard to predict where we'll end up. But I think the tools we make and the way the systems actually work can affect how power is actually distributed, right? And so to move from a system, a centralized kind of database to a distributed database that is built on a system of trust, not of the institution, of one institution, but of the consensus of the community, it opens up, I mean, that's fundamentally baked into the system.
Sure.
Should open up totally new ways of trusting each other.
Sure.
And yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. It's still early days, I think, but
Absolutely. One of the thoughts we had as Helium, being a startup company, we know we're not funded and we're not organized in a way that we can build infrastructure like traditional telcos, like Orange, and that's not something that Helium ever wants to do. However, we do think there's a gap, which I think everyone recognizes, that small devices need to connect somehow in a very low power, long range, low cost way. And we think the way to do that is actually to get the community to build a network with us. So the chicken and egg problem, how do you build a network without having money? You get everyone else to do it. You get the community to do it. You get individuals to do it, and you make it affordable. We think the incentive on the blockchain could do that, but more so, I think what's interesting is we have a chance now to help, I think, underserved communities. We have a chance to help folks that just don't have opportunities to get into tech or don't have opportunities to figure out how to generate some kind of passive income or a new career even. And so I think one of the things Helium's trying to do is we're trying to target, folks that are low skill, low income, just don't have opportunities, as well as women, and particular women in technology, that are looking for ways to become entrepreneurs or looking for ways to grow their career. We think that by joining a network movement where they can become essentially a network provider for devices, this is a chance for them to earn tokens, a chance for them to start a business. Because what we have to do without building our own network, which is very different from a Sigfox and some of the others, is that we have to build a two-sided marketplace. We need people that are willing to host a network, right, make that investment, and we need people that use that network. It's getting people to adopt our standards and use our open source technology, our open source code, open source hardware. And the outcome of that, great applications, certainly, but I think a bigger outcome for us is to give people that just haven't had a chance and access to figure out how to spark their career or figure out how to find their place in society and create that economics that didn't exist, is to do that, to help them do that. And I think, for SMC and your labs, that's one of the big charters for you guys.
Absolutely.
Right?
One of the East Palo Alto, that's why we started there. And because it's kind of like, it's right next to Menlo Park, right across the water. Facebook headquarters are located, and they're, of course, they're doubling in size, tripling in size actually. And there's a lot of people in that community that have been there for decades, and they're having a hard time. And you go down the streets, and when we talk to the city manager, and earlier this year they didn't even have a contract for drinking water. I mean, these are the kind of issues that this city is dealing with. So, obviously they don't have the resources to be talking about innovation per se. So because they're really fixing potholes and making sure that they have drinking water and very core needs. So for us, that's why East Palo Alto is a very special community, and they want the innovation, and the county will be there as a resource. But like you said, how do we scale, and how do we make sure we have the connectivity to bring those resources, and how do we empower them to get into this kind of technology bubble that many of them feel like they're left out of? You know, they're right next to Facebook, a stone's throw, but they don't feel any like they're a part of that movement. So I think, yes, I think that's how we're going to be able to scale.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think to your point, I guess cuts across both points. The challenge of deploying infrastructure is partly related to the business model of how you finance it, right? And we're always, I mean, again, this is way above my pay grade, but capital constrained, and like we want to deploy 4G everywhere. I mean, we're I think 11 of our 19 countries in Africa have 4G in some parts, but it's expensive. It takes time. You only have so much money to decide where to put your equipment, and this is an interesting way to maybe do it faster or differently. I don't know. We'll see if it is faster, but it's a challenge.
Yeah, we have a question from the audience. It's for both of you actually. What do you look for, or how do you measure in terms of success when you do pilots, especially at SMC Labs, and even with Orange? What are measures of success for pilots, and are you incubating new technologies all the time, and how do you convert new technology incubation to actual mainstream usage? So I think two-part question.
Yeah, so we just launched, so we're kind of early in the process, but we launched in May. So right now we have basically 5 use cases that we're testing. I mentioned earlier the smart parking, in particular smart EV and handicap parking, disabled parking, because that's a whole different nuance of trying to find parking if you have an electric vehicle. The air quality, the smart soil moisture for smart irrigation, waste management, and asset tracking. And so right now it's a little early to tell what's successful and what's not. So that data and what we're looking at making sure that the data is relative and valid, more importantly. So that's why we have a couple of air quality sensors that are up and running from different vendors to see which ones are working more robust, that has a more robust data feed. Looking at battery life, we're looking at all of these things because everyone had the specifications. That's what we're looking at. If the battery life is supposed to be 3 years, of course we won't know for 3 years. But right now we can look at what type of data is coming in. Also, how is it easy to turn this into a dashboard that's relevant to the public? And so that's what we're doing now. But the use cases we chose to start out with are the ones that we thought people would have that they can understand and wrap their hands around what that use case is. But it's too early to tell.
Sure.
But with that, we did create a matrix, if you would, that puts things in different boxes, whether it's public safety, mobility, environment, government efficiency. And so when we're looking for use cases that kind of fit into these boxes, and we've met with so many different very talented startups in the last month, as well as kind of the larger companies who we're looking to partner. Right. But we're open. I mean, and we're too new to really say what's successful and not.
Sure.
And what we do is we're going to take all of that, what our findings are, and we're going to share it with the cities.
Sure.
And so we can, hopefully at the end of the day, we can create kind of like a universal kind of experience throughout the county.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, why don't you cover maybe like the transition from just testing incubation pilots to making that mainstream for Orange?
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, it gets to the core of what Orange Silicon Valley as an office is trying to do as an innovation lab here. I mean, for instance, we sell smart cities solutions primarily in the Middle East and in France. A month ago, we're awarded the contract to do all of the smart services, ICT services within what will be the world's largest building. Imagine the Salesforce Tower times 3.
Yeah.
The Jeddah Tower in the Jeddah Economic City in Saudi Arabia. It's the first kilometer-high building. But so our customers, what they want, they want the systems that control the fire alarms and the CCTVs and parking and emergency operations, the kind of, and of course like data and connectivity services in a building, the basic stuff. So they want to have really robust solutions that we can provide to our customers. At the same time, so in other words, they want to use stuff that's been around, and then the company who's providing the service, because we're kind of a master systems integrator, that company is going to be here in 5 years. So we almost don't want to know about startups or don't want to work with too early of startup for that kind of thing. At the same time, we need to know what are the future things we're going to be able to offer our customers? What are the the things around the corner that we're not seeing yet? So that's where we're, we have Orange Digital Ventures, so we invest in startups. We have a kind of corporate accelerator program, a lot of corporate innovation activities out of the office to just understand what's going on.
Yeah.
I think one stat I like is Forbes listed the top 50 AI startups in the world. 23 of the top 50 are in the Bay Area globally, right? And if you think about, in smart cities in particular, like if smart cities are built on data and connectivity, AI is the core of that, right? And I think we're moving to this, this sort of AI city, the cognitive city, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Very cool, very cool. We're getting close to the end of our time here, so one more question. This will be a tough one, I think. From the audience here, when do you think we'll see examples of a full smart city, or are there projects you're aware of where they're actually building a completely sort of new kind of city, like the Jetsons or something?
Well, I would think, Columbus, Ohio should be that city, right? Because they received $40 million from the.
Is that right?
They won the Smart City Challenge a couple of years ago. But I think all eyes, at least for me, because they've received so much, $40 million in federal subsidies, that I think they're the ones to watch right now, and because they had a lot of funding and a lot of local support. San Francisco was part of the bid, I believe, and some others. But it's a big deal, and I know they're tackling. Mobility is one of their biggest challenges because they're so spread out. But that's kind of where I'm.
This is like the singularity. It's impossible to predict beyond all these nonlinearities that are going to happen, because, that is going to be a moving target. What a smart city is in 2050 is going to look really different than what a smart city is now, and I don't think we'll be there for at least until 2100. It depends on what your vision of a smart city is a little bit, but like in some sense, if it's evidence-based policymaking. Think of not just infrastructure changes, but also cultural changes that need to happen for that kind of stuff.
Right.
So I think it's a topic we're going to be talking about, maybe not in these terms, but for decades.
Sure.
Because it'll only keep getting more smart.
Well, and Will, Orange is an international company, so I think your purview is much more global. Do you see it, based on your time here, have you seen other cities around the world really take larger leaps?
There are a handful, and it's very. I think we're just seeing. Well, here I think, for instance, San Diego with their street light scale up to they're going to 3,000 lights with LEDs, but then also as a sensor platform. You just see handful of places, greenfield sort of developments in the Middle East, where there's the will and the money and the vision to do something really interesting. Singapore, other places. But I think part of the challenge with smart cities is that every city is like its own custom operating system. And so to build an application on that, you have to build it almost bespoke for every city. And we haven't gotten to a point where we can just do something and then scale it across all the cities yet. Because the connectivity is not universal, or because the sensors aren't universal.
Right. Well, that makes sense. And I think to me, that just means that there's tons of opportunity for innovation. And that innovation isn't just here in Silicon Valley or in San Francisco. I think it's global. I think it's whether you're in parts of Europe and France and Amsterdam or Moscow or out in China or Japan and
we're thinking
Singapore.
about what does smart cities mean in Africa, right? We're in 19 countries in
That's
Africa.
Right. That's right.
130 million customers. What does smart cities mean in that context?
That's right. That's right. Well, look, guys, thank you so much for doing this with us today on the Uplink, episode number 2. Again, very thankful to have both of you on board with us. So Ulysses, thank you very much. Will, thank you very much. Thank you, Orange, for supporting us in our efforts. And audience, thanks for tuning in. Certainly look forward to being with you guys again. If you're interested in learning more, come to helium.com. Get on our newsletter. You'll hear about episode 3 coming up. And do you guys have a website you want folks to go to?
Yes. We have smclabs.io, and we're also on Twitter. Follow us at labs_SMC.
orangesv.com, or you could actually email me at will.barkis@orange.com if you have specific smart cities questions.
Fantastic, guys. Thanks so much.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, guys.